Darkness doesn't always look the way you expect. Sometimes it wears a smile. Sometimes it laughs. It charms. It draws you close before you even realize the danger has been there all along. People see the surface. They notice the ease, the confidence, the magnetism, and overlook the shadow beneath. Fascination masks what's deadly, and by the time it's revealed, it's already too late. This episode contains violence, sexual assault, and murder. It's not for the faint of heart. Listener discretion is strongly advised. If you're new here, welcome to Chasing the Dark. And if you haven't already, please follow, leave a rating and a review. It's the best way to help new listeners find the darkness. Now, close your eyes, let the room settle around you, and follow my voice into the dark. They call him the Deadpool Killer. In the humid sprawl of Tallahassee, Florida, where the sun baked the earth into a relentless haze and shadows clung to the underbelly of suburban normalcy, Wade Stephen Wilson entered the world on May 20th, 1994, to teenage parents who felt unequipped to raise him. His biological father, Stephen Testaseka, later spoke of the decision to place him up for adoption with a mix of regret and attachment. Wade was quickly adopted by Steve and Candace Wilson, a warm, church-going couple who embodied suburban stability. Their spacious home, manicured lawn, greyhounds, and expensive cars reflected a life rooted in faith, compassion, and middle-class comfort. They poured everything into giving Wade the loving, structured upbringing his birth parents couldn't. On the surface, his early childhood looked idyllic. He was described as a joyful, energetic boy who adored his parents. Wade rode bikes through quiet neighborhood streets, chased the family dogs, and attended church potlucks. But beneath that picture-perfect life, cracks were already forming. Wade suffered multiple concussions throughout his childhood and teens, 4 in total, from playground falls, roughhousing, sports, and car accidents. In an era when the long-term impact of repeated head trauma was poorly understood, these injuries left him with mood swings, impulsivity, and persistent mental fog he would later blame for his disconnection from the world. By middle school at Deer Lake, the troubled label had taken hold. Wade ran with the fringe crowd, often wearing a black hoodie with the hood up, giving him an eerie presence. He grew defiant, distracted, and increasingly rebellious. At just 14, he began smoking marijuana daily in the woods behind the school with a small group of friends. What started as a rebellion soon became a crutch. Incidents mounted. He stole his parents' car and vanished for 3 days. He trespassed through neighborhoods after dark and broke into cars, not always for anything valuable, but for the thrill. The Wilsons, desperate to help, grounded him, enrolled him in youth groups, and prayed with their church community. But nothing seemed to work. At Lawton Childs High School, his behavior escalated. He continued dealing and smoking marijuana openly during lunch. Relationships were short-lived and chaotic. One ended with him stealing from his girlfriend's book bag, followed by a public shouting match in class. The final blow came when he lit a joint in a school bathroom and accidentally set a roll of toilet paper on fire, triggering the alarms. He was expelled for drug possession and the resulting fire. After expulsion, Wade's descent accelerated. Marijuana became a constant. More concussions followed. Petty crimes, break-ins, trespassing, and theft grew bolder. Minor arrests for assault and firearm offenses began stacking up as early as 2012. The once joyful boy from a good Christian home had become sullen, delusional, and untethered. The suburban stability his adoptive parents had worked so hard to build was crumbling, and the darkness that had quietly taken root in Tallahassee was preparing to spill into something far more sinister. Tallahassee's familiar streets, once playground for petty mischief, now served as arenas for escalating criminality. At 18, fresh from alternative education and presumed 2013 graduation, Wade's disconnection from structure propelled him towards the law's grasp. His adoptive parents, Steve and Candace, watched helplessly as their efforts to guide him faltered. The couple who provided a suburban sanctuary could no longer contain the storm brewing within their son. Wade's substance abuse had evolved into something he leaned on just to get through. He was still dealing with the lasting effects of his 4 childhood concussions and 2 car accidents, and everything felt unstable in a way that he couldn't quite manage without it. The year 2012 marked Wade's formal brushes with authority in Leon County. Assault charges stemmed from a heated altercation at a local party, where Wade's hot-headedness turned physical. It started as something small, and he ended up shoving someone, drawing police attention. Firearm-related offenses followed. Wade was caught handling stolen or unregistered weapons, a reckless flirtation with danger that hinted at deeper issues. His parents intervened, paying fines and arranging community service, but Wade's disregard for consequences grew. He viewed these incidences as mere setbacks, not warnings. By November 2013, it all finally caught up with him. Wade was convicted of burglary and grand theft after breaking into a home in Tallahassee. He targeted valuables, electronics, cash, selling them for quick money to fund his habits. The court sentenced him to prison, a stark departure from the suburban life his parents had curated. From November 26, 2013 to September 19, 2014, Wade served time in the Florida Department of Corrections. Incarceration stripped away freedoms, but it didn't reform him. Behind bars, he navigated the harsh realities of prison life, forming connections that would later prove fateful. Upon his release, he returned to Tallahassee, but the experience hardened him, amplifying his sense of alienation. The head injuries from his childhood lingered, manifesting into headaches and mood swings, and he self-medicated with marijuana and whatever else was available. His freedom didn't last long, quickly overshadowed by ongoing chaos. In 2015, Wade faced his most serious charges yet: sexual battery and kidnapping. The incident unfolded after a party in Tallahassee where he met a woman. According to reports, she accused him of assaulting her in his SUV, restraining her against her will. Wade denied the allegations, claiming consent, and the case went to trial. A 6-person jury acquitted him, citing insufficient evidence or inconsistencies in the account. The acquittal was a narrow escape, but it emboldened him. Classmates from his past whispered about the news, recalling his high school antics, the cheating, stealing from his girlfriend's backpack, and wondered if patterns were emerging. His parents stood by him, believing he was innocent, but the strain on his family deepened. Wade's delusional state, as his parents later described post-drug addiction, began to show an erratic behavior. His drug use didn't subside and eventually went beyond weed. Wade experimented with harder drugs, seeking escape from the mental fog of his concussions. After one car accident in his late teens, he was left with whiplash and trouble thinking clearly at times. A second, more severe crash just added to everything he was already dealing with. It wasn't until later that a neurologist explained how injuries like his can cloud judgment and lead to bad decisions. At the time, Wade didn't take any of the medical advice seriously. Instead, he dove deeper into Tallahassee's underbelly, associating with those on similar paths. He kept getting into small-time trouble, stealing from friends, pawning whatever he could for cash. In one case, he even took things from someone he used to be close to. It was the same cold pattern repeating itself, a reminder of all betrayals he'd left behind in high school. By 2017, Wade's criminal path looped back to incarceration. Convicted of stealing firearms, a dangerous escalation from earlier burglaries, he entered prison again on October 17, 2017. That stretch lasted until July 15, 2018, when he crossed paths with somebody who pulled him into a darkness that he couldn't escape. Someone who would change everything. Wade became entangled in a murder-for-hire plot surrounding Jerry Michael Williams, also known as Mike. Denise Williams, the wife of the victim, allegedly orchestrated the plan from afar, and Wade claimed involvement post-release. He later admitted receiving $20,000 in a white manila envelope during a meetup while on probation, tasked with carrying out the attack. Though never charged in this case, the association highlighted his growing comfort with criminal networks. Wade walked out in 2018, free on probation, but freedom came with chains he couldn't stand. The rules grated against him, each restriction a weight he pushed back against. He kept using, kept running with the same people who'd almost ruined him, as if drawn back to the very darkness he was supposed to leave behind. The post-prison period was marked by domestic turmoil. In February 2019, an ex-girlfriend reported a violent incident to the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office. She accused Wade of beating and strangling her during an argument, escalating to claims of kidnapping and rape. Investigators probed but found insufficient probable cause for an arrest, partially due to an existing no-contact order. The woman had previously reported him stealing her laptop and cell phone, leading to a guilty plea in September 2019 for pawning stolen property. Wade received credit for time served in probation, another slap on the wrist that failed to deter him. These events showed just how volatile he was and how messy his relationships could get, echoing the old accusations from his high school girlfriend about disrespect and theft. Throughout these years, Wade's connection to his biological father, Stephen Testaseka, remained sporadic. They reconnected around the age of 18, exchanging phone calls and meetings, but it offered little stability. Stephen would later testify about Wade's lack of remorse, but in the pre-2019 era, it was a tenuous link to his origins. Meanwhile, Wade's adopted parents clung to hope. In letters, they reminisced about the joyful child lost to addiction, pleading for understanding. Wade's troubles weren't isolated. They rippled through Tallahassee, affecting those around him. Former classmates, now adults, reflected on his path. Something fell off. Something didn't make sense. like it wasn't appreciated or taken for granted. By 2019, Wade's life was barely holding together. Probation hung over him like a weight he couldn't shake. Drugs blurred the edges of who he was, and the same people who'd led him into trouble in the first place were still around. The old head injuries didn't make things any easier. He had a kind of charm, sure, the kind that would make people laugh one second and fear him the next. But charm couldn't hide the chaos inside him. On July 1st, 2019, he was arrested for battery in Lee County, another step down a road that was already dark. Whatever promise his upbringing had held was gone. By then, shadows had swallowed him whole, and there was no turning back. By the summer of 2019, Wade Wilson was barely keeping it together in the Fort Myers, Cape Coral area. He bounced from couch to couch, from short-term rental to short-term rental, picking up odd cash jobs wherever he could. His life seemed to revolve around Melissa Montanez. Intense, messy, explosive. They'd fight over jealousy, make up in a rush of passion, and then fight all over again. Her car, constant trouble. He'd take it without asking. Sometimes he'd bring it back late, or sometimes not at all. On Sunday night, October 6th, he was behind the wheel again, that engine rumbling under him. It felt familiar, alive, carrying him straight towards the neon chaos of Fort Myers Bar. Another night, another chance for trouble. Buddha Live was packed, the air heavy with sweat, perfume, and spilled drinks. The music thumped through the floor, lights flashing over bodies moving to the beat, and Wade moved through the crowd like he belonged. Clean shaven, no tattoos yet, and that effortless smile ready to charm whoever crossed his path. By the bar, Kristine Melton laughed with her coworker Stephanie Sailors. 35, warm eyes, and a real smile. She was unwinding after a long week of waitressing and caring for her mother with Alzheimer's. There was something steady about her, a quiet strength in the way she carried herself, like she'd been giving more than she'd ever been given, and somehow kept standing anyway. Wade walked up slowly. Mind if I grab the next round? His voice cut through the music without shouting. Kristine looked at him, smiled. Sure, why not? He stayed, asked where she worked, how long she'd been in Florida, what she liked about Cape Coral, and he actually listened, nodding, laughing with her, slipping in little stories about himself that made him seem relaxed and adventurous. Stephanie watched comfortably. Kristine leaned in, and the spark was instant. Before they knew it, hours had gone by. He bought more drinks, cracked more jokes, touched her arm just enough to feel natural. By closing time, the three of them were tight. Wade suggested the night keep going at a friend's place. Kristine, still buzzing, agreed. Stephanie went along too. They arrived at Jason Shepard's house in Fort Myers around 2:30 in the morning. Shepard, a loose acquaintance of Wilson's, let them in. The living room was dim, the music low, the drinks continued. Kristine edged a little closer without really thinking about it, shoulders brushing, the kind of looks that start to linger just a second too long. At some point, they ended up in a bedroom. It wasn't forced. It wasn't tense. There was laughter and ease between them. Just two people caught up in the moment, letting it happen. Later, Stephanie would say she didn't hear anything unusual, just what sounded like a normal, intimate moment before they came back out and rejoined everyone. Around 4 a.m., The three of them made their way back to Kristine's duplex in Cape Coral. It was a small place, but warm. Family photos tucked onto shelves, soft blankets draped over the couch, the faint scent of lavender and coffee lingering in the air. Stephanie stayed for a bit, but not long. Around 5 a.m., she started getting ready to head home. She wanted to be back in time to take her son to school. At the door, she pulled Kristine in for a tight hug and kissed her cheek. "Text me tomorrow, okay?" Kristine smiled, tired but happy. "I will." Stephanie left. Wade stayed. Kristine, worn out from the night, headed to her bedroom. She changed into pajamas, slipped into bed, and reached over to turn off the lamp. The room sank into darkness, broken only by a soft glow from the hallway drifting through the open door. Wade stayed in the living room for a while, the noise of the night long gone. The apartment had gone silent. From down the hall, he could hear her breathing, slow, steady, asleep. Then he stood up. He walked into the bedroom and paused in the doorway, letting his eyes adjust to the dim light. Stephanie lay there still, peaceful, completely unaware. For a moment, he just stood there, watching the rise and fall of her chest. Silent stretching, heavy. And then something in him shifted. No argument, no warning, just a decision. He stepped closer, straddling his hips to pin her lower body, and closed both his hands around her throat. And in that instant, everything changed. Kristine woke up in full terror. Her eyes snapped open, wide and panicked. Her mouth opened in a soundless scream. Her hands flew to his wrists, nails digging deep, scraping skin as she tried to pry his fingers away. She buckled beneath him, hips twisting, legs kicking violently, heels drumming against the mattress, sheets tangling around her ankles like restraints. The struggle was fierce, but silent at first. Only wet, choking gasps escaped as his thumbs pressed into the soft hollow beneath her jaw. Her face flushed deep red, then purpled. Her neck and forehead tightened, her veins showing through in a way that felt wrong. The whites of her eyes started to change, tiny red spots spreading from the pressure. Her tongue protruded slightly, swelling. Then there was a sudden, sickening crack. Her body reacted instinctively, fighting for air, movements turning frantic, desperate. She grabbed at his arms, trying to pull him away, leaving marks behind as she struggled. Seconds stretched, then blurred together. Time moving strangely in a moment that felt like it would never end. But slowly, her strength started to fade. The fight drained out of her, her movements growing weaker until they stopped altogether. And still, he didn't let go. He held on, waiting as if listening for something that never came. When he finally let go, her head rolled to the side, settling into the mattress at an angle that didn't look right. The bruising was already starting to show along her neck, dark fingerprints rising beneath the skin. Her eyes stayed open, but there was no life behind them. Her mouth hung slightly open, like whatever she was about to say never made it out. Her body, now completely still, gave into gravity, the sheets beneath her quietly taking in what was left. Wade stepped back, breathing hard. The room felt smaller now, thick, close, like the air itself had changed. The smell lingered, sweat, something sour, something faintly sharp that didn't belong. For a moment, he just stood there, staring, waiting. Nothing moved. Then he did. He grabbed her by the arms and pulled. Her body slid off the bed, her head hitting the floor with a dull, hollow thud before the rest followed. No resistance, just weight. Dead weight. He dragged her across the carpet, the fibers shifting beneath her until he reached the doorway. He left her there, caught between rooms, like she no longer belonged anywhere. He went to the linen closet and grabbed whatever he could. Blankets, sheets, a heavy comforter. Back and forth, quick, restless movements. Then he started to cover her. One layer pulled tight around her shoulders, another over her legs, then one over her head, hiding her face, erasing her. Still, he kept going. More layers, more covering, smoothing it down, folding it in, until the shape beneath it all didn't look like a person anymore. Just a mound. Still, too still. He stepped back and looked at it for a moment, then turned around and moved through the house. He opened drawers, checked her purse on the counter, and took her keys. He didn't rush. The front door stayed unlocked and the lights stayed off. Outside, the early morning air was cool and quiet. The black Nissan Versa sat in the driveway exactly where he'd left it. Around 6:17 a.m., he got in, started the engine, and drove off, pulling away as the sky began to lighten. Before we go any further, let me take you somewhere else for a moment. In the next episode, we're stepping inside a house where 8 people were killed in their sleep. The Villisca Axe murders. A quiet town. A locked house. An entire family gone before morning. But the part that stays with people isn't just what happened that night. Because when the bodies were taken out, when the house fell silent, something still remained inside those walls. People who stepped through the doorway say the air feels wrong the second you walk in. Heavy. Watching. Footsteps where no one's standing. Children's voices when the house is empty. Shadows that don't match anything in the room. And the longer you stay, the harder it is to ignore the feeling that you're not alone. Some people leave shaken. Some don't make it through the tour. So if you think you know this case, you don't know this version. Follow Chasing the Dark, and don't miss what's waiting in the next episode. The Versa made its way through the early morning roads as Wade drove north out of Cape Coral towards Fort Myers. Kristine's vanilla air freshener was still there in the vents, but now it mixed with something sharper, something that didn't belong after what had just happened. His forearm still burned where her nails had dug in, and he shifted his grip on the wheel, flexing his fingers, feeling that ache deep in the muscles that hadn't quite let go yet. There were no sirens, no flashing lights, just the open road ahead and that strange, wired clarity that followed. He pulled into Melissa's business around 8 a.m., catching her outside as she unlocked the door, just as the unfamiliar black Nissan rolled into the lot. She glanced up, frowned at the car right away, then recognized Wade stepping out, and the look on her face changed instantly as suspicion set in when she asked him where her car was. He walked toward her with that same easy smile, like nothing was off, like this was just a normal moment. But she didn't meet him the same way. Her body tightened, arms folding across herself as she stepped back, putting space between them without even thinking about it. He closed in quickly, reaching for her wrist, trying to pull her towards the car. She yanked away just as fast, her reaction sharp and immediate, her voice rising as the moment shifted into something else entirely. He hit her across the face, hard enough to split open her lip. Melissa cried out and staggered back. He slapped her again, open palm cracking across her face, then clamped both hands around her throat. She clawed at his arms as her nails drew fresh blood over the welts from Kristine. He dragged her by the hair up the stairs towards her office door. Inside, he slammed her back against the wall, pressed his forearm across her windpipe. She gasped, her vision spotting black at the edges. Blood from her split lip sprayed across his cheek and t-shirt. For a split second, he flinched at the warmth. Enough for her to twist and break free. She stumbled down the stairs, screaming, blood streaming down her chin and neck. Outside, people reached for their phones, and by around 8:50 a.m., someone had already called 911. Wade ran back to the Versa and sped off, tires screeching, leaving Melissa on the pavement, gasping as people rushed in to help her. The charge came through quickly, but it was only a misdemeanor, not enough to raise alarms or trigger any kind of urgent response, and no one was out searching for him yet. He drove south again, back towards Cape Coral, the taste of her blood still on his lips. Around 9:30 a.m. on Pondella Road, he saw Diane Ruiz walking to her shift at the Moose Lodge. She wore black work pants, a simple blouse, comfortable shoes, and her hair was pulled back. At 43, she was the kind of person you could count on. She hadn't missed a single day of work in 5 years. Always texted her sons good morning, and that day, she kissed her fiancé goodbye with plans to watch her younger son's band later that week. Wade slowed the Versa. Passenger window was already down. He leaned across the seat and asked Diane if she knew where the high school was. Diane paused for a moment and looked him over. He seemed polite, he was clean-cut, maybe a little unsure of himself, so she stepped closer to the open window. Wade told her that he was really bad with directions and asked her if she would mind hopping in for just a second to just show him. Diane hesitated. Most would have just kept walking, but Diane was kind, motherly, the type who helped strangers, and he seemed harmless. So she opened the door and slid into the passenger seat. The door locks clicked, and Wade accelerated hard, tires chirping, heading in the wrong direction. As Diane's hand flew to grab the handle, Wade grabbed a fistful of her hair and yanked her head back against the seat. She screamed and clawed at his arm while kicking at the dashboard. The car swerved slightly. Wade kept one hand on the wheel, the other tightening around her throat, thumbs pressing deep into the windpipe. Her face flushed red, then purple. Her eyes bulged, veins standing out. Red dots appeared in the whites of her eyes. Then, her body went limp. He thought she was gone, until she stirred, coughing, gasping, and still alive. He pulled into an empty lot behind the Sam's Club, tucked away with the chain link fence on one side and tall weeds on the other. Quiet and out of sight. He pushed open the passenger door, dragged her out by her hair, and she hit the gravel hard, wheezing, trying to crawl away on her elbows and knees. Wade stood over her, watching her labored breaths, the blood from her split lip mixing with the dirt. Then he climbed back behind the wheel and shifted the car into drive. The first pass crushed her legs. She screamed, the sound raw and full of pain. He reversed, the tires spinning in the loose dirt, and then forward again. The second impact caught her torso, ribs folding inward, breath whooshing out in a wet gasp. Blood spread across the windshield in a fine mist. He kept going. Forward, reverse, forward, reverse. 10, 15, 20 times. Each pass mangled her further. Her limbs twisted at unnatural angles. Her skull caved in sections. Her flesh torn open. Organs ruptured beneath the weight. Her screams faded to gurgles, then silence. The body became a pulp, unrecognizable, clothing shredded, blood soaking into the dry earth, steam rising faintly from the cooling remains. Finally, he stopped. The engine idled. Wade stepped out and approached what was left of Diane. He nudged her with his shoe. Nothing. No movement. No breath. Blood had smeared on his shoes and pant cuffs. He bent briefly, checked for a pulse at the neck. Nothing. Satisfied, he returned to the Versa, wiped his hands on his thighs, put the car into gear, and drove away, leaving Diane's mangled body behind in the field, out in the open, and waiting to be found. The vacant house in Fort Myers didn't feel empty. It felt occupied by something you couldn't point to. Not noise, but pressure. Like the air had weight and it wasn't letting up. Wade moved through it slowly, not wandering, just aware of every small thing. The boards under his feet, the dry, stale air, the sting along his forearms where nails had broken skin. It all stayed with him, close, like it wasn't finished. He ended up on the floor with his back against the wall, his phone in his hands as it charged, eyes fixed somewhere ahead without really seeing. Time didn't move quickly. It stretched far too long and then snapped forward, like pieces of it were missing and he was dropped back in mid-moment. Outside, the neighborhood kept moving. Voices carried, cars rolled past. A regular day to some, starting just like any other. But inside the house, it felt cut off from all of that. The house held on to its own rhythm. His mind didn't jump around. It circled. Not flashes, full sequences from start to finish, over and over again. Kristine first. The bar, the ease of it, the way everything felt normal right up until it wasn't. Then the shift, the bedroom, the second everything turned, the moment she woke up, the panic that followed. He didn't skip anything, didn't soften it. He went through it exactly as it happened, every second laid out the same way each time, like it had already been said and couldn't be changed. Then Diane, the road, the stop, the question that didn't seem like anything. The moment she got in, after that, everything tightened, not scattered, not chaotic, just narrowed. Control, resist, silence. It played back the same way, clean and direct, like something already finished that kept repeating anyway. Somewhere in the house, a board shifted. He stood up, paced once, then again. He wasn't frantic, more contained, but unable to stay still. His body was catching up now. The soreness in his hands, the dull pull in his palms, the tightness in his shoulders. It didn't go away. It stayed under everything. At one point, he left to grab some food from a nearby gas station. Hoodie up, head down, in and out. No one looked twice. When he came back, nothing changed. The same air, the same stillness. If anything, it felt closer. He moved through the house again, opening drawers without really looking, picking things up and setting them back down. Like staying in motion kept the silence from closing in too tightly. Then he started calling his biological dad Stephen. He called him multiple times and walked him through everything the same way it had been replaying in his head over and over again. What had happened, where he'd been, and what he'd done. He was eerily calm and steady, almost like he needed to keep it in that order for it to make sense. And those calls went on and on. His dad pushed him out of that space and made him face what this actually was, what it meant, and what to expect next. By the end of the conversation, his dad had convinced him to turn himself in. When the call stopped, the house felt even quieter. He stood at the sink and drank water straight from the tap, staying there longer than he needed to before moving again. Sitting, standing, sitting again. Nothing settled. Sleep came in short bursts, but never fully. And every time he drifted, something pulled him right back. A thought, a memory, the same moments returning, whether he wanted them to or not. By morning, the light came in dull and gray through the windows, flattening everything it touched. It didn't change the feeling in the house. It just made it easier to see. Outside, the world was already moving again. Doors opening, cars starting, people stepping into their daily life. Inside, everything had already come to a stop. When the knock came, it cut through the house cleanly, sharp, certain. He didn't run. He didn't hesitate. Hands up, cuffs on, with no resistance. And just like that, the stillness broke. The back of the squad car was cold. The air was sharp against his skin, and the ride was quiet, except for the low murmur of the radio and the steady sound of the road beneath the tires. He shifted once, feeling the pull in his wrist, the ache still sitting in his hands. Everything from the last 24 hours stayed with him. Not distant, not fading, just there, unmoving. The interrogation room was smaller than it appeared on the surface. The walls pressed in like they had memory, holding the echoes of every confession that had ever been spoken there. The fluorescent lights above stuttered in a low hum, and with each flicker, shadows crawled across the beige surfaces, thin tendrils of darkness that seemed almost alive. The air was stale, tinged with disinfectant and the faint underlying smell of coffee that sat too long in plastic cups. It carried weight, a quiet heaviness that filled the lungs as surely as the walls filled the eyes. Wade Wilson sat in the center, wrists cupped loosely before him, the metal cold against the thin skin of his palm. The ragged bandage had begun to scab, red seeping into white. Welts on his forearms itched under the fluorescent glare, but he only acknowledged them in subtle scratches, like a man tracking a phantom pulse beneath his skin. He didn't plead, he didn't ask, and he didn't fidget. He simply existed, poised, taut, aware of every detail, the vibrations of the air conditioner rattling in the corner, the hum of the lights, the way the table's metal edge pressed cold against his forearms, the way the paper cup of water left a ring as he sipped, tracing the line of condensation with a fingertip. The detective sat across from him, calm in a way that felt almost intentional. She didn't move much. She didn't rush to fill the silence with questions or small talk. She just stayed there, steady, letting the quiet do the work instead of forcing anything out of him. Her focus stayed on him the whole time, not obvious, not intense, just watching, picking up on the small things, a shift in his hands, the way his jaw tightened, the slight tilt of his head. Small details most people would miss, but she didn't. She took it all in, piece by piece, reading someone who was there right in front of her, but not fully present at the same time. Outside the one-way mirror, the officers watched closely, picking up on the same small shifts, aware that in this room, time didn't move the way it should. Every second seemed to stretch, each movement building on the last. The faint creak of a chair, the scratch of a pen against paper, even the low hum of electronics settling into a rhythm, something steady beneath it all. As Wade's mind continued to unfold, he was paying attention to everything, taking it all in, processing it, even as the detectives waited. He was present, aware, but still pulled by something deeper. Memory, impulse, something chemical that hadn't fully left him. What he remembered didn't start here. It already had been laid out in those calls to his father. He'd gone through it step by step, describing what he'd done with a level of detail that stayed consistent and almost measured. Stephen had listened, hearing the calm in his son's voice, the way he walked through it without hesitation, without urgency. That carried into the room now, shaping how he spoke, how he recalled it, like he was following something already set in place. His father's influence stayed with him. It wasn't loud, it wasn't forceful, but it was there pushing him towards facing what he had done, what had happened, towards saying it out loud. Kristine Melton came first. The bar, the drinks, the way the conversation mirrored itself easily, laughter building trust without effort. In his memory it stayed clear, almost structured, the normalcy before everything changed. He described the moments leading up to it, the sense of control, and the shift that followed. Her vulnerability, the panic that set in, the way it ended, what happened after, how he handled it, how he moved through it, each part connected to the next. Not rushed, nothing skipped, all of it laid out in a steady, even rhythm. Then came Diane Ruiz, the path that she walked alone, the brief exchange that seemed harmless at first, the car, the moment everything changed. From there it narrowed again, control, resistance, and then silence. He walked through it the same way, piece by piece, describing what happened without breaking from that same cadence. It didn't rise or fall. It stayed calm and detached, as if he were recounting something already fixed in time. But under that, there was something else driving it. In those earlier calls, he admitted to it. The way drugs affected him, the way something took over. A loop in his head repeating itself. pushing him forward. It wasn't scattered or chaotic. It had rhythm, something that took over decision-making and replaced it with movement, urgency, and action. Even sitting there now across from the detective, that same undercurrent shaped the way he spoke, the way he remembered, the way everything came out. The detective didn't interrupt. She let the silence stretch where it needed to, understanding that what wasn't said could matter just as much. The pauses carried weight, revealing more than direct questions ever could. Wade remained aware of her, of the room, of the cold metal at his wrists, of the stale air. Everything blended together. The awareness, the memory, the lingering pull of compulsion, forming a steady, almost hypnotic rhythm. Even the smallest movements, his fingers brushing his forearm, the way he reached for water, the tilt of his head, felt like extensions of something internal, a visible reflection of what was still moving beneath the surface. At one point they brought him food, a burger and fries, nothing special, just something normal dropped into a room that didn't feel normal at all. The smell mixed with the sharp, clean scent in the air, and for a second, it almost felt out of place. He ate slowly, not rushing, still talking as he did, like none of it interrupted the rhythm he'd settled into. If anything, it seemed to steady him, something physical to focus on while everything else just hung there in the room. Outside of that room, though, everything had already changed. Diane Ruiz's 15-year-old son was still waiting, checking the time, looking at the door, expecting his mother to walk in. The space she should have filled stayed empty, and the world kept moving around him anyway, leaving him in that place where nothing makes sense yet. By then, officers had already found her. They were led there by birds circling overhead, something instinctual drawing them in. The reality of it was already set, already known. But inside that room, Wade didn't know that. It was kept from him, held back, so what he said stayed his, untouched by anything outside. By the time the trial started, he didn't look like the same person anymore. The change was obvious. Tattoos covering his face and body. Nothing subtle about them. Nothing easy to ignore. They said something without him needing to speak, turning him into something more deliberate, more defined in how he presented himself. And in that courtroom, everything landed at once. The medical examiner's findings, the injuries, the evidence, piece by piece. Then the families. Kristine's family spoke about the life she never got to have. Diane's sons talked about what was left behind, the quiet, the empty spaces, the things that were never going to happen again. Then it circled back to the calls. Stephen Tessaseka talked about the tone, the way it was said, the way everything was laid out, and that phrase stayed there. Kill, kill, kill. Not loud or dramatic, just steady. Something that didn't need to be forced to be understood. It showed a pattern, something controlled, but driven by something underneath. Something that didn't sit right no matter how it was explained. The jury didn't take long to deliberate. Guilty on every count. Then came the next phase, where everything was laid out again. How it was calculated, how deliberate, how severe, and the recommendation was clear. On August 27, 2024, Judge Thompson gave the sentence: death. The room stayed quiet as the gavel came down, and you could feel it settle over everything. Wade stood there, not giving much away, the tattoos on his face catching the light. Whatever had carried him through everything up to that point, it stopped there. But the weight of it didn't. That stayed behind, sitting in the room long after he was gone. The courtroom lights had barely dimmed, the sound of the gavel still echoing, when Wade Wilson's story stopped being just a case and started turning into something else entirely. Because outside those walls, something uncomfortable took hold. The man who had taken 2 lives wasn't being talked about as a killer, not consistently, not honestly. Instead, he was being reshaped into something people wanted him to be. The letters came in fast. Women, men, strangers from all over, reaching out not because of the truth, but in spite of it. Across social media, they became known as the Wade Wives, a nickname that stuck as attention around him grew. They built communities around him, shared photos, stories, and fantasies. And somewhere in all of that, the reality of what he did started to slip further and further out of focus. This isn't new. We've seen it before with Ted Bundy, Richard Speck, cases where violence didn't repel attention, it attracted it, where brutality became part of the appeal instead of a warning. And that's where it gets uncomfortable, because at some point, this stops being curiosity and starts becoming something else, something that ignores the victims completely. People wrote to him about his eyes, his tattoos, the pain they believed they saw him in. They talked about fixing him, understanding him, loving him in a way that no one else could. They built a version of him that didn't include the reality. The names Kristine Melton and Diane Ruiz, the lives that were taken, the families left behind. And it didn't just stop at words. Money followed. Thousands of dollars, commissary deposits, phone calls funded by people who had no connection to him beyond fascination. One fundraiser alone pulled in over $90,000. One person sent in over $24,000. Now that's not curiosity anymore. That's an investment. And it forces a harder question. What does it say when someone can look at violence like this and still choose to admire the person who caused it? Because this isn't about gender. It's not just women. It's not just men. It's anyone who looks at something this brutal and decides to turn it into something appealing. There's a line there, and crossing it means choosing fantasy over reality, choosing the idea of a person over the truth of what they've done. Inside the prison, that influence didn't stay contained either. One inmate didn't just watch from distance. He started to mirror it. The same imagery, the same identity built around violence, not understanding it, replicating it, and eventually that turned into action. After his release, that same inmate went on to commit murder. That's where this stops being abstract, because fascination doesn't always stay harmless. It can spread, it can influence, it can take something real and turn it into something dangerous. Meanwhile, the reality never changed. Kristine Melton is still gone. Diane Ruiz is still gone. Their loved ones still live with their absences every single day. That doesn't get rewritten. It just gets ignored. And that's the part that matters. Because while people were writing letters, sending money, building this version of Wade Wilson that made them feel something, control, connection, purpose, they weren't looking at the full picture. They were looking at what they wanted to see. And that choice, that willingness to look away from the truth, is what keeps this cycle going. So before you move on from this, before this becomes just another story you listened to and left behind, ask yourself something. What is it that draws people towards someone like this? And more importantly, where do you stand in that? Because it's easy to say you'd never be one of them. Easy to separate yourself from people writing letters, sending money, building fantasies around someone who took lives. But attention takes different forms. Curiosity, fascination. They need to understand. The urge to look a little closer, to stay a little longer, to keep listening even when you know what you're hearing. At what point does that cross the line? At what point does looking become something else? Because the truth is, people like Wade Wilson don't become something bigger on their own. They're made into something bigger. Piece by piece, click by click, conversation by conversation. And every time the focus shifts away from the victims, every time the story centers on him instead of them, that myth grows. So the question isn't just why do people do this? It's whether we're willing to recognize it when it happens and decide not to be a part of it. Because once you strip all of that away, once the noise dies down, the fascination fades, and the story is left exactly as it is, you're left with what actually happened. Two women who never made it home, and two families who never got them back. And a night that doesn't get rewritten, no matter how many people try to turn it into something else. And in the silence that followed, after the letters, the headlines, the noise, what remained wasn't the myth people built around him. It was the reality he couldn't escape. And that is where we leave this chapter, not in closure, but in contemplation, in a world drawn to the forbidden and the dangerous. Is it worth asking, what pulls us towards darkness? Why do we watch? Why do we linger, even when it chills us to the bone? If the shadows of the story reached you, if the rhythm of it stayed with you, there are more dark tales waiting. Follow Chasing the Dark to follow every confession, every secret, every shadow lurking just beneath the surface, so you don't miss what's coming next. Please leave us a rating and a review. It really does help more people find the show. Next time, we're headed into something just as disturbing, but very different. We'll explore the eerie, unsettling axe murders in Villisca, a case that starts with violence and ends somewhere much darker. So until then, keep your lights low, and remember, not everything in the dark stays hidden.